Here in Brussels, the challenge to President Bush's leadership and the direction of the Western alliance, confronted by divisions from within over nuclear weapons policy and the changing face of communism. In Washington, the leadership crisis of the Democratic Party deepens with ramifications for the whole legislative branch as House Democratic Whip Tony Coehlo says he will quit the Congress, confronted by attacks on ethics. And we'll have an exclusive interview with Coehlo shortly. First, about President Bush and the NATO summit opening tomorrow. It marks the 40th anniversary of the Western Alliance, what many consider a turning point for NATO.
We want to see an end to the division of Europe, and we want to see it ended on the basis of Western values. We will join Western European nations in encouraging the process of change in the Soviet Union, pointing to the day when the Soviet Union will be welcomed as a constructive participant in the community of free nations.
Instead of a planned showcase for celebration, in some ways, it's a showdown. President Bush is under increasing pressure to be bolder and more innovative in meeting the challenge of Mikhail Gorbachev's charm and arms control offensive in Europe. West Germany is leading the NATO faction, asking the United States to open negotiations with the Soviets for reducing short-range nuclear missiles, an indication of Gorbachev's success at driving the agenda and his potential for driving a wedge in the Western alliance. Earlier today, as Jacqueline Adams reports, Mr. Bush's advance work for the NATO summit included a tribute to American World War II dead at a cemetery in Italy.
Italian police arrested a small group of neo-fascists who tried to stop President Bush's motorcade through the seaside town of Nettuno. They didn't stop the president from later hopping out of his limousine, Gorbachev style, to hug a baby and shake a few hands. Mr. Bush also literally dropped in just to say hello to the sailors aboard the USS Guadalcanal, anchored offshore. But his real purpose on this Memorial Day weekend was to honor the 8,000 young Americans buried in Nettuno who fought and died 44 years ago, freeing Italy from the Nazis.
The outcome of the war itself seemed to hang at that moment on the valor and the vigor of each man who struggled near the water's edge.
World War II was George Bush's war, and even now, 4 decades later, he choked up, wondering why he survived, remembering 2 brothers who didn't.
William and Preston Kaspervik are buried here in soil that they helped free. Brothers in life, brothers in arms, brothers in eternity.
Today's ceremony was more than an emotional pilgrimage for a 64-year-old former bomber pilot or an echo of countless such scenes back home. Mr. Bush was trying to send a clear message to Europeans too young to recall that peace has its cost.
It might be difficult for them to understand why we need to keep a strong military deterrent to prevent war and to preserve freedom and democracy. The answer is here, among the quiet of the graves.
We'll have more about the background, perspective, and context of this NATO meeting later in the broadcast. Now about our other top story, the political leadership crisis in Congress. An exclusive interview with House Democratic Whip Tony Coehlo. He is quitting Congress over what he sees shaping up as a prolonged and unfair attack on his financial ethics and against other top Democrats. A separate, drawn-out ethics investigation has fueled talk that House Speaker Jim Wright is on the verge of resigning. I spoke with Congressman Coehlo, who's in Washington, a short while ago.
The president has to set a standard. He can't sit back and say, on one hand, I'm the good cop, and let his people over in the Republican National Committee and the Republican Campaign Committee be the bad cops. The president can stop all this if he wants to. If he wants a kinder and gentler America, if he wants to do away with the petty partisan politics that he talks about, then Mr. President, stand up and say so, and stand up and fire those people who are unwilling to do what you want to have done. It's time for the country to move forward. I don't think that the people out all across this country want us to tear down the system. They want us to make sure that the system functions, that it works, and that the men and women who are working in the system are honest and decent. And I can assure them that they are. Do we make mistakes? Yes, we do. Did I make a mistake? Yes, I did. I'm willing to pay for it.
We'll have more of our exclusive interview with Congressman Coehlo in just a moment.
Today's X-Lax is a good morning, guaranteed.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Medical experts agree.
Mine's pushing 250,000 miles.
Quaker State exceeds every single car maker's U.S. requirements for maximum engine protection. The big Q stands for quality. Always has, always will.
With us now in Washington, Tony Coehlo, Congressman from California, Whip of the House, the third-ranking Democrat in the House of Representatives. Congressman, thank you for being with us. Republican Whip Newt Gingrich has said, and I quote him now, Wright, meaning Jim Wright, and Coehlo are symptoms of a disease. That's a direct quote from the Republican Whip. And he maintains that 34 years of Democratic control in the House of Representatives has led to institutional corruption by the Democrats. Can you address yourself directly and speak candidly with us about that?
Well, I know Newt well, and I think what Newt is doing is trying to create a political agenda to try to get control of the United States House of Representatives. Newt has said that the only way that the Republicans can get control is to destroy the institution, tear it down, and then to rebuild it. I don't think the American public want that. They don't need that. We have to put at the same ethical plane, the same ethical standard as conforming to financial disclosure reports, the same level, what we're doing to the future of this country, what we're doing on housing, what we're doing on education. Those are the same ethical concerns that we as a nation must be concerned about, and if Newt Gingrich is really concerned about the future of this country, he would place that on the same priority. And let's get to the real issues of this country, Newt, instead of playing politics.
Congressman, when I arrived here in Belgium, I found that some members of the administration, some Republicans, no surprise to you, politics is a tough game, were gleefully taking some sense of triumph of what has happened to Jim Wright, what has happened to Tony Coehlo. And some of them were, with a wink, I'm told, passing the word that, listen, the worst of it is not even over yet. That others in the Democratic leadership, Tom Foley, the second man down for the Democrats in the House, mentioned specifically, one, do you know of anything of an ethical character nature that would prevent Tom Foley from being the next Speaker of the House if Jim Wright steps down? And secondly, when is all this going to stop, and how is it going to stop?
Dan, I know of nothing that would prevent Tom Foley from a character point of view or an ethical point of view that would prevent him from being one of the best speakers if Speaker Wright decides to step down, from being one of the best speakers that we've ever had. He's a great person, a great man, an intellect, and the Republicans are concerned about him becoming Speaker if Mr. Wright steps down, because they know that he'd be a very forceful individual. They don't want Mr. Wright to step down. They didn't want me to step down, because all they're interested in is having this issue for the election of 1990. You know, some people in the Republican Party spread the rumor about Mr. Dukakis and his mental health. They like to spread rumors about people to tear them apart. You know what they ought to be doing is following what George Bush said on Inauguration Day. It's time to put aside partisan petty politics and let's get to the real issues of this country. That's what we're talking about. That's what the Republicans ought to be talking about. Let's be constructive.
Well, can you step back and observe it, although it's still very recently after you're announcing your resignation, and address what do you think is wrong with the money culture in the House of Representatives? What needs to be done to get the whole House back on a high plane in terms of the money culture?
One of the problems that we have is that you can't be tight-fisted in regards to our public officials. We, as taxpayers, need to understand that we need to help provide for some of the money for these campaigns, and we also need to provide for a better salary. If we want to have a good government and we want to have a strong government, then let's provide the utensils for our elected officials, for our appointed officials, to do the job that we want. We have a great system, a great country, but we as taxpayers now need to help make that system work. We can do it.
Thank you, Congressman Coehlo. Congressman Tony Coehlo in Washington. At least two major stories will be working all this next week. the Democrats' disarray in Washington, and the NATO meeting here in Brussels, Belgium. We'll be along trying to cover both of those stories for you. For now, that's tonight's CBS Evening News. Dan Rather in Brussels. Good night.
I'm Harry Smith.
And I'm Kathleen Sullivan. Tomorrow, former Westerman Chancellor Helmut Schmidt on the NATO meeting.
This week, Joan Baez and Mikhail Baryshnikov on CBS This Morning.
This is CBS.